Welcome to On The Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down the big one, the first big one of 2025, UFC 311. It is a phenomenal looking card. 2 title fights, Makhachev defending the lightweight title, Merab Dvalishvili defending the bantamweight title. Like I said, it's going down this Saturday night, a phenomenal card, 14 fights as well, so it's absolutely stacked from top to bottom. Cannot wait to break it down, cannot wait to watch it on Saturday night, and like I say, this is going to be one of the big cards of the year, and we're getting it already with the second event in of 2025. But just before I get into those breakdowns, as always, if you do want to jump into the action this weekend, which I'm assuming anybody that's listening to this is going to want to jump into the betting action this weekend, remember to bet responsibly, but also remember to go to MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler, whether you're a long-term gambler wanting to beat the bookies long term. We've got full written breakdowns for you guys. Maybe you're somebody that just wants to follow exactly what I'm betting on, the professional handicapper at MMA Play 365. We've got an official bet section for you to just simply follow and tail the fighters that I bet on. Very straightforward. Or maybe you're a fun gambler and you want the long shot parlays, or maybe you want to create your own parlay. Well, we've got a fun gambler section on the betting hub as well. And do not forget, every single subscription comes with Bayes AI, our UFC prediction software, which gives you a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every UFC event, and that's within every subscription package as well. You've just got to choose whether you want one event monthly, or a lot of people recently actually have been taking our annual at $99. We've had quite a few of them come in since the start of the year, and that's all at MMAplay365.com. And that's it, the introductions out the way, the promotions out the way. Let's get breaking some fights down for UFC 311. And of course, as always, we start right at the top of the card in the main event. We've got the UFC Lightweight Championship fight. We've got Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan 2. That's right, it's a rematch. And I think the first thing that we need to jump into here is that first fight. It was back in 2019. It was in Russia. Arman Tsarukyan was making his UFC debut as a young 22-year-old on 3 weeks' notice. Now, let me just pause for a second there, because without me digging ridiculously into the past and looking at every UFC debut for every fighter that the UFC's ever had, that must be the most difficult UFC debut in UFC history. If the nerves aren't bad enough, if the UFC jitters aren't bad enough, going into enemy territory in Russia against a Russian is bad. As a 22-year-old on 3 weeks' notice as well, it takes some balls to do that. But then when your opponent's Islam Makhachev as well, like, wow, that is, like I say, that is one of... In fact, I'm going to go down and say that is the hardest UFC debut I think any fighter in the UFC has ever had. If you guys can think of a harder UFC debut, then drop it into the replies and the comments in YouTube and let me know your thoughts. But man, that's got to be up there at number one. But the most impressive thing about that fight is, look, Tsarukyan got beat clean and decisive. But that doesn't paint the picture of how that fight played out. Like, Tsarukyan, still to this day, arguably in the top maybe 2 or 3 hardest fights that Islam Makhachev's had in the UFC. I think you'd have to say the Volkanovski fight, the first Volkanovski fight, was probably the one that you'd have to say is the hardest fight that Islam Makhachev's had to date, just because it was so close, probably could have gone either way on the scorecards. But after that, I mean, some people are saying that the Dustin Poirier fight last time out, that was, that was a little bit sketchy for Makhachev. I don't think it was necessarily, that even. I think Makhachev again just edged what he needed to edge. But that Tsarukyan fight, man, like, Tsarukyan was the first man to take Islam Makhachev down in a UFC fight or in an MMA fight. So, that tells you exactly what that young kid had at 22 years old, coming in on 3 weeks' notice. But every time Makhachev took Tsarukyan down, he couldn't really hold him down for too long. Tsarukyan, it was almost like, as soon as his back hit the mat, the gears just started going through the gears in regards to how fast he was scrambling, and they're educated scrambles as well. And from that fight, we knew Tsarukyan was going to be up there at some point in the UFC at the top of the division, because you don't come in as a 22-year-old kid against Islam Makhachev on 3 weeks' notice in Russia and have that type of performance without being a future world-class fighter. And it's really fitting that the next time that Tsarukyan fights Makhachev is for the UFC championship fight, you know, with Makhachev being the current champion. And I think that, look, this fight, it's going to be so close. And from a betting perspective, it's nuts that Tsarukyan is like a plus 300 favourite. He's likely going to close a bigger favourite now than what he did on his UFC debut against Makhachev. And I know Makhachev wasn't the champion then and he is now, and I get that side of it. But Tsarukyan, 6 years on, he's now 28 in his prime, not a young 22-year-old kid. He's filled into his body, he's moved team, he's now American Top Team, which has been there for a number of years. You know, he's got world-class training partners, world-class strikers, wrestlers, grapplers, world-class coaches every single day of his life. And I'm not saying he didn't have the world-class team before, but American Top Team's renowned for being one of, if not the best MMA mega gym on the entire planet. So Tsarukyan, in regards to where he is now, is nowhere close to what he was back then. And look, granted, Makhachev's leveled up as well, but Arman Tsarukyan has really developed into what's looking like a promising, you know, elite level fighter. And this fight's going to be absolutely insane. Like, from a striking perspective, that's probably where Makhachev's biggest developments have come in, because he has become a better striker. He's now able to, you know, bridge and chain the striking into the wrestling and the grappling. He blends that a lot better than what he used to be able to, and that's because of the striking developments. But Arman Tsarukyan's a good striker himself, very technical, he's got power. I'm actually expecting Tsarukyan to be the better striker in this fight. But where it becomes really interesting from a stylistic perspective is Arman Tsarukyan can match, in my opinion, he can match the wrestling and grappling of Makhachev in this fight. When Makhachev's shooting takedowns, I'm not expecting him to get a takedown whenever he wants a takedown. I'm expecting Tsarukyan to be able to defend takedowns. I'm also expecting Tsarukyan to be able to stand right back up to his feet if he is taken down. Like Makhachev, for as good as an elite as a wrestler as he is, his grappling is like super elite. Once he gets fighters down, that's when it's difficult to get up. But I think Tsarukyan will be able to get up when he needs to as well. And then, like I say, if Tsarukyan's defending takedowns and being able to stand up, that's the defensive side covered. I actually wouldn't put it past Tsarukyan to take Makhachev down again, to prove a point, to get him down. Now, again, the interesting thing here is if Tsarukyan does get Makhachev down, I think Makhachev can get back up to his feet as well. So I'm kind of seeing the wrestling and grappling being quite nullified here. I do think we're going to see it. I don't think we're going to see one of those fights where you've got two world-class wrestlers and grapplers to the point where you see a 25-minute kickboxing fight. I do think we're going to see takedowns on both sides. I do think we're going to see some top-side grappling on both sides. But I don't think that it's going to weigh too heavily on the result of the fight. I think the heavy moments that are going to be weighed in this fight are actually within the striking, because if the wrestling and grappling is being nullified, and neither fighter are really scoring, you know, too many points, if you like, within the wrestling and grappling, it is going to come down to the striking. And I kind of feel like Tsarukyan might be the better striker in this fight. So, look, I've got two parts of me here. The first part is, look, I can see Makhachev. I can genuinely see Makhachev winning this fight. It's just, I can't be confident in it. It's weird. It's really strange. Like, if Makhachev wins, I feel like he's just going to find a way to win during the fight, making whatever in-cage adjustments he needs to make. But, like, pre-fight, breaking this fight down and analysing it, I think it is a super, super close fight. And I think that Arman Tsarukyan is the only fighter in the division that can match the wrestling and grappling of Makhachev, both offensively and defensively. And I think that's a really key point, because, you know, the type of fighter that Makhachev is going to struggle against is exactly the style and the qualities that Tsarukyan presents. Makhachev will crush strikers, crush elite strikers, because he'll just take them down. But any other fighter from a wrestling and grappling perspective in the division, he'll crush them as well, because nobody comes close to him. But the thing is, Tsarukyan's the only one that I feel really genuinely does match in wrestling and grappling. I think this is going to be the fight that's the hardest fight for Makhachev in the division. I think it's going to be the toughest fight that he's going to have in his career, even tougher than the Volkanovski fight that he had. And that's why I'm leaning towards the underdog, because that fight against Volkanovski was super close, that first one. So if this fight's going to be closer, I think it's going to be close enough where Tsarukyan could potentially edge it. I think it's a razor close fight. It's a phenomenal fight. In these types of fights that I believe are going to be so close, I say it week in, week out, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to be siding with the underdog, and that's what I'm going to be doing here. So I'm picking Arman Tsarukyan to win this fight and become the new UFC lightweight champion. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we've got our second title fight of the night, our second championship fight. This time we're in the bantamweight division. We've got Merab Dvalishvili versus Umar Nurmagomedov. And man, I said it before Christmas when this fight got announced, and I did get quite a little bit of shit for it on X. But look, everyone's got their opinion. This is my opinion. I think this could be the best fight that we see in 2025. Not from like a name on paper perspective, but actually how this fight plays out. Because if you love mixed martial arts and everything about mixed martial arts, then I feel like this fight's just going to be absolutely outrageous. And if it's not outrageous, I'm going to be so disappointed. Obviously, if you're one of these MMA fans that don't like to see wrestling and grappling and you prefer just to see a striking fight, then yeah, this fight's probably not going to be for you. Or at least I hope it's not going to be for you, because I absolutely want to see the takedowns, the wrestling, the grappling, the scrambles, the 100-mile-an-hour fight, which I think that's what we're going to get. And with Umar Nurmagomedov, I actually think he's probably more well-rounded than Islam Makhachev. I think he's more well-rounded than what Khabib was as well. I think he's genuinely the most well-rounded fighter than Nurmagomedov out of that Russian team with like I say, Makhachev, Khabib, and all those other guys, the cousins and the brothers and everything. So I think that Umar Nurmagomedov has got a really good base and a really good skill set, to the point where he is an elite wrestler and an elite grappler. But I actually think, weirdly here, I think Dvalishvili is going to turn Nurmagomedov here into a striker, which is quite strange, and I'm not sure I've ever said this before or heard anybody say this before, because what we normally say is when there's two strikers, for example, and one's much better than the other, one striker will turn the other one into a wrestler because, you know, they're not getting far or they've hurt them and they're going to turn into a wrestler and try to take the fight down. But this is the flip side. I think both fighters here are going to think that they are the better wrestler. I think that both fighters are going to think that they're going to be able to hold each other down. But I think what's actually going to happen is I think we're going to see early takedowns from both sides, and I think we're going to see completed takedowns as well. I think both fighters are going to be able to stand back up to their feet within the scrambles. I think we're going to see mad scrambles here where, you know, it's going to be 100 mile an hour. You're going to struggle to follow it with your eyes, and you're going to try your best to sort of go through position by position with them. But I think they're going to eventually get back on their feet. But what I think is going to happen from there is I think that Dvalishvili isn't going to stop with the wrestling. That's it. That's his MO. And this dude will be able to fight and wrestle. If this fight was a 10-round fight, I'd still expect Dvalishvili to be absolutely nowhere close to being gassed. So with Dvalishvili, I think because of the pace of the fight, he's going to thrive on that and continue to wrestle. I think what Umar Nurmagomedov's going to be doing is trying to defend those takedowns and standing back up, and then trying to catch Merab within the moments of the wrestling whilst they're separated on the feet. And I actually think that there's a good chance here that Umar might be able to knock Merab out. Like, I think if we see Umar land something on Merab and we see Merab drop, hurt, and then Umar finishes him, like, I'm not going to be surprised. I think there's more chance of Umar knocking Merab out than beating him over a 5-round decision. And the reason why I'm saying that is because with Merab, his biggest weapon in MMA, yes, he's a great wrestler, he's a chain wrestler, he's relentless, He's got really, really good qualities about him. He's a champion. He's a UFC champion for a reason. But his biggest weapon by a million miles is the cardio, is the gas tank. Like, he weaponizes that like no other fighter. Nobody has been able to keep up with Dvalishvili in regards to the pace and pressure that he puts on inside the cage. And since he's been fighting 5 rounds, that weapon's only got stronger, because now we know. I mean, before the 5 rounds, we were like, well, can he do it for 5 rounds? But now we've seen on multiple occasions. He absolutely can do it for 5 rounds, to the point where, like I've already said, I think he can do it for 10 rounds if he needs to. So with that being his big weapon, the question that I have to ask is, if this fight goes late, if we see a 3rd round, a 4th round and a 5th round, what does Umar look like in round 3, 4 and 5 with that sort of pressure and pace that Dvalishvili is putting on? Because, look, Umar has shown no signs of having any cardio issues or gas tank issues at all, but he's also not fought Dvalishvili, who puts on a faster pace, more pressure, more relentlessness than any fighter that Umar's ever fought in his life. So I think that there's a good chance here that Dvalishvili can keep his wrestling going throughout the fight, work throughout the striking moments that Umar Nurmagomedov's going to have on the feet, and just keep wrestling. Even if he's not holding Umar down, if Merab's coming into this fight and he's hitting 3-4 takedowns a round, which is possible, then eventually, although the individual takedowns aren't going to score points, collectively you then can't ignore it. If there's 4 takedowns in a round, that means that Dvalishvili has done more work than what Umar's done, unless say Umar's dropped him or something like that. So I think that there's a chance here that Merab can do to Umar what he does to every other fighter and drown him, because with Umar, like I say, his skill set is elite. He's an elite striker, elite wrestler, and an elite grappler. So if you're going to beat someone like Umar, you're not going to beat him skill for skill. You're going to beat him via another method, which there isn't many other methods, but one method is for Merab to beat him via just absolutely drowning and draining the gas tank. So I think that's a real possibility in this fight. And like I say, when you go skill for skill, I think Umar's a better fighter than Merab. But when you're looking at a fight over 5 rounds, even if Merab's working hard but kind of drop round 1, maybe round 2, there's every chance that the longer he wrestles, the more relentless he becomes as the fight goes longer, the slower, or the more we see Umar slowing down throughout the rounds, the more Merab's going to come, the more successful he's going to be. And I just think, again, like I said with the main event, I think it's going to be another one of those fights that if it goes 5 rounds, which there's a good probability of it going 5 rounds, I think that we're going to get to that judge's scorecard and think, well, shit, Merab's definitely got this round, Umar's definitely got this round, but then there's 3 rounds which we've got absolutely no idea about, and then we could see absolutely anything from a scorecard perspective. So again, just like I mentioned with the main event as well, in these situations where you've got a big underdog, which again, I think from a betting perspective, the line should be much, much shorter, much closer. I get why Umar's a favourite. I would never have expected him to be an underdog, but I think the line's way too wide, and in a fight that I think is going to be that close, where there's legitimate path to victories, I'm going to side with the underdog 9 times out of 10. And again, I'm going to do that here. So I'm picking Merab Dvalishvili to win this fight and still the UFC bantamweight champion. Now, before we get to the next fight and continue with the breakdowns, I'm going to do something that I've not done before, and I'm going to summarise this main event and the co-main event picks, because for those that have tuned in, maybe you're a first-time listener, maybe you're somebody that hasn't been listening for very long, and you've just listened to my main event pick, my co-main event pick, and I've picked against both Dagestani Russians, both dominant fighters that have got every chance of winning this fight, and the fighters out of this Khabib team are just elite, and they always have been. So I'm just wanting to summarise the picks together because I appreciate that I've picked against both Russians. Now, anybody that's been following my journey in the betting game for the years and years that I've been betting and gambling is, look, I have always been so hard on the Dagestani Russian guys, and when I say so hard, I don't mean like I've been tough on them. I mean I've been so solid on them that I don't think that I've ever picked against them. And even in the Khabib days when everyone was picking against Khabib, they were picking Barboza to beat him because Barboza was the elite striker. They were picking Gaethje to beat him, Poirier to beat him, Conor McGregor to beat him. I was always one of those that was completely on the other side and saying, look, I know Khabib's a minus 300, minus 400, minus 500 favourite, but he's going to beat these guys. And then even when you come to Islam Makhachev, like before Makhachev was even in the top 15, I was on Twitter. At the time, it was Twitter. Obviously, it's X now. I was on Twitter stating that Islam Makhachev will be a future champion. I got so much shit for that. I had people saying that I didn't know what I was watching, I didn't understand the game and all this sort of stuff. And not only did Islam Makhachev become the champion, he became the number one pound for pound ranked fighter as well. So look, even before Makhachev was a ranked fighter, I was calling him a future champion. And look, that's for a reason. But again, just summarising the main event and the co-main event, I just feel that both of these fights are going to be so close. Like, would I be shocked if Makhachev and Umar Nurmagomedov won? No, I wouldn't. I actually think with an Umar Nurmagomedov, he's a future number one pound for pound ranked fighter as well, exactly where Islam Makhachev is right now. But as of right now, styles make fights, and I just think Dvalishvili poses, again, a huge threat to Nurmagomedov in this fight, a threat that Nurmagomedov's not seen before. And this is the point. I think Merab and Arman Tsarukyan are the only two fighters in their respective divisions that are going to give real problems to the guys that they're fighting. And it just so happens that they're both fighting on the same card, and just so happens that I'm siding with the underdog from a prediction and a pick perspective because I believe that the fights are so close. So again, I just wanted to quickly summarise the main event and the co-main event. It's not that I've ever been against, Team Khabib. I've always been completely the opposite. It's just I'm being real in this situation. I think Tsarukyan has absolutely got the tools to be able to cause a fight that's so close that we could see a split decision win for him. And exactly the same for Merab. He's got the style and the quality and the ability and a weaponized gas tank that's going to cause a problem for any fighter, regardless of how much better they are from a skill set perspective. Merab will just stick to you. And again, it's going to cause a fight that I believe could be so close that we could see crazy scorecards all over the place where Merab might be able to take a split decision win. And if it does get to a super close decision where it's 3-2, so I'm talking about both fights, if we get to a super close decision where it's 3-2 to one fighter or a split decision, you always want to be on the underdogs in those spots. So I appreciate the level of dominance that Islam Makhachev is as a fighter. He's super dominant, pound for pound number one in the world. I also appreciate Nurmagomedov is absolutely super dominant, elite everywhere, and in my opinion a future pound for pound number one fighter in the world. But right now both of these Russian fighters have got such a tough fight ahead of him where I just think we could see absolutely anything. So that's my summary and the reasoning for picking against both of these fighters. I just think there's something there with the skill set and the quality, and these are the only two fighters that can beat the respective opponents from Dagestan in Russia. So that's the main event and the co-main event summary. I'm going to be jumping straight back into the next fight right now. And in that next fight in the light heavyweight division, we could have future title fight implications here. We've got Jiri Prochazka versus Jamahal Hill. Now, I was on Jamahal Hill against Alex Pereira, rough bet. Definitely wouldn't be making it again. And like I say, I think I overanalyzed Jamahal Hill in that spot, or maybe overestimated him, should I say, because I just didn't give Pereira the respect that he deserved in that specific fight. Look, Jamahal Hill's quite athletic for the division. He moves well, he's fast. And I just thought that might be a problem for Pereira, who is quite a static kickboxer type, Muay Thai type style of fighter. And it absolutely didn't play out like that at all. Like, it was the quality of striking that shone through in that fight to beat Jamahal Hill. So, look, I kind of see Jamahal Hill as the type of fighter that I maybe have struggled analysing correctly in the past. And on the flip side with Jiri Prochazka, he's definitely one of those fighters that I haven't been that accurate analysing as well. And sometimes this happens with some fighters. Like OSP evaded me for absolute years. For like his entire career, I just struggled to always get a read on that guy. So in this fight, I'm kind of feeling, well, both fighters I've struggled to analyse in the past, and now you're expecting me to be super accurate with a prediction. So it's tough because on one hand, I don't trust Jamahal Hill after that performance against Alex Pereira. And Jiri Prochazka is a type of fighter that can take some damage and be maybe a round down and then come back. Like, look at that Alex Rakic fight. Like, Rakic absolutely battered Prochazka's legs, beat him up, looked great in round one. But then Prochazka made him fade with the pressure, with the fact that Prochazka just wasn't going anywhere. Like, Alex hit Prochazka with some hard shots to the head as well, and Prochazka just didn't even, move. Like, the dude's just like a brick wall. So on one side of the coin, I'm thinking, well, if he's a brick wall and he's able to break fighters, take damage, and then make the fighter that's trying to deliver the damage start questioning themselves inside the cage, well, absolutely he can do that to Jamahal Hill. But then with Jamahal Hill, I'm going back to, well, he's got the athleticism advantage in this fight, in my opinion. He's got the speed advantage. He's accurate with his shots. He's cleaner from a striking perspective. So where Jamahal Hill wasn't cleaner, didn't have the clean technique that Alex Pereira had in his last fight, he's the one that's the clean technical striker in this fight. Because, look, Jiri's no mess on the feet, but the striking's a little bit unorthodox, whereas Jamahal Hill's, like I say, nice, clean, straight punches, and then with Prochazka, he'll throw from weird angles, and he sort of fights on the fly inside the cage, whereas Jamahal Hill has got solid technique and reasoning behind every shot behind him. So this is, now I'm seeing both sides, and I can completely understand that this fight is a pick'em. Jamahal Hill was, I believe, a plus money underdog. He's slowly starting to flip into a very slight favourite, but for the most part, it's a pick'em across the board, and I completely get it, because you can make a genuine argument for each side. For a pick'em prediction perspective, I am going to be going with the fighter that I do think is slightly more technical in a fight that should be a striking fight. And also in that striking fight, the same fighter that's more technical is also slightly more athletic and slightly quicker from a striking speed and movement perspective as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jamahal Hill to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is super fun as well. I feel like I'm going to introduce every fight with that exact line at this point. But we've got Beneil Dariush versus Renato Moicano. Renato Moicano's on an absolute heater right now. For him, it's a 4-fight win streak, 3 finishes within those 4 fights. And to be honest with you, the only loss that he's had in like the last 5 years was that short notice fight, upper weight class at a catchweight against Rafael dos Anjos, which was 5 rounds as well. You can kind of give Moicano a pass for that, because Rafael dos Anjos, I believe, had that full fight camp for that fight. Whereas, like I say, Renato Moicano was fighting heavier than he's ever fought before, and also fighting 5 rounds on like a couple of weeks' notice. So you can kind of give Moicano a pass for that. If you take that fight off the table, then he's on a 6-fight win streak, not a 4-fight win streak. So look, Moicano's on a heater, whereas Beneil Dariush, man, I feel for Dariush quite a lot, because Dariush went on one of those long win streaks, similar to what we saw with Leon Edwards, that eventually landed Leon Edwards with a title fight opportunity that he obviously took against Usman. And with Dariush, he was on an 8-fight win streak. He'd beaten some top guys. He'd got finishes as well. Every time he was an underdog in a fight, he was getting counted out. I've counted him out at times as well. I'm not immune to that. But every single time he was counted out and an underdog, he'd be coming with a superb performance, with a finish as well. So Beneil Dariush is on this 8-fight winning streak, and he very much deserves a title fight. But at the time the division was going through that much of a change, there was other top contenders and a champion as well, and it was tough to give Dariush that fight. So the UFC gave him Charles Oliveira. If he wins that fight, it's a 9-fight win streak against Charles Oliveira, was his last win, and then he's definitely got the title fight. But the thing is, he gets finished KO TKO round 1. So that stopped, that ended the title hopes for Dariush, because at that point he would have to go on another 5-6 fight win streak, and it's just a tough ask at the top of the division. So then he steps in against Arman Tsarukyan. In his next fight, he gets knocked out again in round 1. So you can't fault Dariush's last 2 losses, because they're against Arman Tsarukyan, who's fighting for a title this weekend. And then the one before that was Charles Oliveira, who was a former UFC champion, a dominant one as well, that's beaten some of the top names in the division. It's just, with Dariush, although you can't put too much, negative stock into taking losses against those 2 guys, all the momentum that he built up is gone. So what must he be like mentally? Because he was in a position where he was knocking on the door for a title, and now suddenly it's all gone. All the hard work that he did over the years previous, building that 8-fight win streak, which is, you don't see many fighters in the UFC having an 8-fight win streak, because the UFC is so competitive. So I just feel that when you're looking at both fighters, I feel like Moicano is fighting Dariush at just the right time for Moicano. Moicano's on his way up. I think, look, if Moicano beats Dariush this weekend, Moicano's going to be on that same win streak or a similar win streak as what Dariush was on. He's going to have that same type of momentum progressing towards a potential title fight. And then we'll see what Moicano does against the top 3 in the division. But for right now, I think Moicano's meeting Dariush at just the right time, with Dariush on the way down, Moicano on the way up. I kind of feel that Dariush has been around for so many years, he's starting to maybe look a little bit tired as well, whereas Moicano, again, he's full of life inside the cage right now. And then from a stylistic perspective, where Dariush is strongest is within his grappling. Well, Moicano's a legit BJJ black belt as well. Like, the wrestling probably on the side of Dariush, if I'm being honest. But again, Moicano's got the grappling to be able to not allow Dariush to dominate in those grappling positions where Dariush has dominated so many good fighters in the past. So I think stylistically, Moicano's got the ability in the areas where Dariush is strong to be able to prevent Dariush being strong where he's strongest, if that makes sense. So I think that Dariush isn't going to have the advantages he would have had in previous fights. Then from a striking perspective, I think it's super close there as well. But I think Moicano is just going to be able to get at Dariush. I think he's going to have the momentum behind him. I think he's going to be faster on the feet. I think he's going to be more elusive. And look, if Moicano can get takedowns as well, I don't think he necessarily holds Dariush down, if Dariush is on his back, but Moicano's an expert at taking the back. Now, if Moicano gets on Dariush's back and locks a body triangle up, for example, then Dariush is in real danger of getting submitted, even though, again, he's a high-level jiu-jitsu practitioner. So all in all, I think, look, Moicano's going to be dangerous on the feet. I think he's going to be quick as well, much quicker than Dariush. I think that he's going to be able to nullify where Dariush is strongest, and that should allow Moicano to push on in this fight and be able to really impose his own game. Maybe, I don't think he double legs Dariush, but maybe he trips Dariush down to the mat, and as Dariush tries to quickly get back up using the cage, maybe Moicano sinks a hook in, and I just feel that it's Moicano's time. I think he's catching him at the right time. One fighter's on the way up, whereas one fighter's sliding a little bit further down, and I think it's a good spot for Moicano. So for those reasons, I'm picking Renato Moicano to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Kevin Holland versus Reinier Derrida, and this is a really good fight. Look, Reinier Derrida had a bit of a stop and start kind of opening to his UFC career. Like, the Gerald Meerschaert fight wasn't super clean. I know he got the 3rd round submission and he got a number of takedowns against Meerschaert, and he ended up looking really good towards the end of the fight. But, the first, the opening moments of the fight, the first round, maybe round and a half, Derrida did look like he was maybe a little bit short in that fight, not physically, but I mean, coming up short in regards to his skill set and his UFC caliber. But towards the end of I think that maybe Reinier Derrida just needed a little bit of time to settle in, because once he did settle in, he started getting the takedowns, and he eventually submitted Gerald Meerschaert, who's got, I believe, 29 career submission wins himself, which, just speaks to the level of Derrida's grappling, which is a high level. He can strike as well, but it's not as clean as what his grappling is. Now in comes Kevin Holland, because Kevin Holland, look, this is a really, really good fight, and it's a super close fight as well. And with Kevin Holland, he's going to be the better striker in this fight. I think he's going to move a little bit better. He's less awkward than Derrida. He's more, sort of calm and composed and smooth on the feet, whereas Derrida on the feet is a little bit rigid. And Derrida's going to need the takedowns in this fight is what I'm trying to get at. It's whether he can get them or not, because with Holland's got, although it's really weird because Holland's a legit black belt, under a legit coach as well, so you would expect Holland to be this nightmare grappler, and he is a good grappler, but the thing is, when Holland loses fights, it's because he's getting stuck on his back and he's struggling with the grappling. And yeah, he's had some good moments grappling himself, but he struggles against good grapplers and fighters that are good top side. So you look at the Derek Brunson fight, you look at the Marvin Vettori fight, the Brendan Allen fight, the Roman Dolidze fight, all these fights is, Holland's struggling because the guy's just better top side. So with Derrida's another one of those fighters that's going to be better topside. It's just the difference is, I think that Derek Brunson, Marvin Vettori, Roman Dolidze, and Brendan Allen are all better strikers than Derrida. So that's why this fight gets close, because those guys were good strikers where they can hang with Holland on the feet so they can get the takedowns. Whereas I don't think Derrida's going to be as good of a striker. However, that might make Derrida more urgent to get the fight down to the mat. And I think we are going to see some takedowns in this fight. And this is the key thing, because that's the question you've got to ask. Do we see takedowns? Because if you don't think we see takedowns in this fight, then Kevin Holland wins quite comfortably. But I do think we're going to see takedowns in at least 2 out of the 3 rounds, maybe all 3. And at that point, that's if it goes all 3, by the way. But at that point, if you think that we're seeing takedowns, which I do, then you have to think that Derrida's got a really good chance of winning this fight, because not only would he be able to control Holland for a significant portion of the fight, but whilst the fight's on the ground, Derrida's also got finishing upside from a submission as well. So yeah, look, that's where I'm at. I think Derrida is going to have a tough opening stage to this fight. It's tough opening moments where Kevin Holland is looking great, but I think Derrida finds the takedowns throughout the fight and the takedowns that he needs to potentially win the fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Reinier Derrida to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Bogdan Guskov versus Billy Elekana. Now, this is supposed to have been Guskov versus Johnny Walker. Johnny Walker pulled out. I can't remember even seeing Johnny Walker pulling out. So I don't know what injury he's out for, but I'm a little bit gutted, to be honest, because I was really looking forward to that fight. It was going to be super explosive. I think Johnny Walker's the better quality fighter, but I think Bogdan Guskov comes with the power, so it'd have been a really good fight. But here we've got Billy Elekana, and Bogdan Guskov is now like a minus 300 favourite. And I do understand it. After watching Billy Elekana, I think that Elekana, he's not a slouch. Like, he's fought in PFL, he's fought in some good promotions, but I just think that he's got traits as a fighter that are going to serve him really good in other fights, but in this fight I think he could potentially be in trouble. And the main trait that I saw from Elekana is that he allows his opponent to back him up a little bit too much, which I think is going to be an absolute nightmare for Guskov. The way you want to fight Guskov is by putting the pressure on Guskov to where Guskov's on the back foot and he's loading up on big overhands that you're seeing coming from a million miles off, and you can tie up with him if you need to, if things get a bit too heavy, or you can maybe take him down if you're a good wrestler, topside grappler. But I just don't see any of these attributes from Billy Elekana, to the point where, like I say, he allows opponents to come forward on him. He did it with a 38-year-old Chuck Campbell in PFL, and I just put Guskov in the gloves, if you like, of Campbell in that fight against Elekana. And I'm thinking to myself, if that's Guskov in there, I think he knocks Elekana out, because there was so many opportunities where Elekana was backed up that Guskov can explode, and that's where Guskov's strongest. If Guskov can come forward, set the pace and be aggressive and pick and choose when he lands shots, then he's going to be a nightmare, because the dude hits like a truck. And I think Billy Elekana is going to get caught by something in this fight. Elekana, for me, looks like the more technical fighter, absolutely, when it comes to technique versus technique from a striking perspective. And that's the other thing. I do think the fight's going to be won and lost on the feet striking. I forgot to mention that. But yeah, look, I think Elekana's the more technical striker, but because he backs up, and Guskov, I think, is going to be bigger and more imposing inside the cage, I think Elekana is going to get backed up. He is going to be against the cage, and he is going to allow Guskov to be landing some hard shots and hard combinations, and I think one of them, gets through and knocks Elekana out. So for those reasons, I'm picking Bogdan Guskov to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is an interesting fight. We've got Payton Talbott versus Raoni Barcelos. Now, it's interesting because Payton Talbott is potentially the most hyped prospect in the UFC right now. And I'll be honest, it did take me a couple of fights to really get on him. Sometimes it does. I won't jump on a hype train straight away. I've been around, MMA for like 10, 15 years now at this point, and I've seen so many fighters come and go in different promotions, and I understand that you can't always jump on a prospect straight away, because you need to see them against a high level competition before you start making those sort of claims of being solid on, this guy's going to go all the way. And it took me a while on Payton Talbott, but I'm kind of there on him, I think. I do think this fight's interesting, though, because if he goes out there and blows Barcelos out the water, then we've absolutely I think we've got nailed on a fighter that's going to end up in the top 5. Now, that's the thing is with Barcelos, he's not the fighter he used to be, but man, he's still a damn tough Brazilian fighter that's skilled everywhere. He's still got power. He's still got insane fight IQ. You know, he's fought a high level of competition, so he's been around the block. He's got the experience, but not only has he got the good striking, he's got good wrestling, he's got good grappling. Like I say, he's on the wrong side of 30, but he's still a fighter that, in my opinion, has got qualities that's going to allow Payton Talbott to either sink or swim in this fight. And look, when it comes to Payton Talbott, I'm not too interested in his last fight against Yanis Gamori. I think that was a foregone conclusion before the fight even started. The fight that I'm still super interested in is the Cameron Simon fight. Now, I bet Cameron Simon is an underdog in that fight, because that was one of those fights where I'm like, well, damn, Cameron Simon's a prospect himself. The bookies think that Payton Talbott's a bigger prospect. I think the fight's going to be somewhat close. I think it's going to be competitive, so I'm going to go on the Cameron Simon side as an underdog. But man, Talbott absolutely destroyed Simon, lit him up. You know, it was super impressive, because I know that Cameron Simon is a very high level fighter. So to see someone do that to Simon straight away, you know that guy is a hyper prospect that's going to go on to do great things. So for me, I'm sort of taking the Gamori fight out the mix, because that was sort of a bit of a filler fight for where Payton Talbott is. I don't mean any disrespect to Gamori. I just feel that, look, Talbott was like a minus 12, 13, 1400 in that fight anyway. So even from a betting perspective, that tells you that the fight was kind of a filler fight. So this fight's now interesting, because if Talbott comes out here and does to Barcelos what he did to Cameron Simon, then yeah, you've got to be all in on Talbott going to the top 5 and potentially fighting for a title one day. He's still young, he's quick, it's his timing, he's got that, you know, you remember Conor McGregor in his prime, he's got that level of timing where he doesn't need to hit so hard or so accurate. He's just got the timing down to a key, and when you've got the timing down, you're going to be able to land shots. And I just feel that Talbott, I'm not saying he's not accurate, by the way, because he absolutely is, but this is the thing. Payton Talbott's got the timing, he's got the accuracy to go with it, and then, like I say, he's just absolutely piecing up opponents because of that. And then if you try and take him down, his defensive wrestling's getting better. His grappling is also improving as well. That was, especially early in his career, that was a point that a lot of people made in regards to his grappling, that he can maybe be got at there. But everything is just in development with Talbott, and he's looking better and better each time we see him. He's looking more of a complete fighter each time we see him. And against Barcelos here, I think that Barcelos is going to be shooting takedowns. I think he could get a takedown or two as well. I think Talbott might even struggle on one of the rounds, because Barcelos is trying to take him down and keep him down. But I think for the most part, we're not going to see Barcelos do that for a full 3 rounds. We're going to see Payton Talbott be able to have moments on the feet to the point where I think he's going to be landing hard on Barcelos. He's going to be landing quick combinations. His timing's going to be there, so every time Barcelos comes into range, he's going to hit him, and then suddenly we'll see the takedown attempts slow down because Barcelos is struggling to get into range, or maybe Barcelos starts, shooting, takedowns from distance too far out where Talbott's seeing them coming. Maybe he can time a knee or an uppercut. I think we're going to see Barcelos do some good work early in this fight, but I think the longer the fight goes on, the more Talbott grows into the fight, the more he starts landing on Barcelos, and the more he starts taking over. And I do think that we could see another devastating performance from Talbott when all is said and done in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Payton Talbott to win this fight. And in the next fight, we're in the heavyweight division with stylistically a really interesting fight. We've got Jailton Almeida versus Serghei Spivac. And it's interesting because we know that Almeida's MO is to get his fighters down to the mat where he can be dominant, heavy topside, keep them down. Like, Almeida actually took a lot of shit off a lot of people for, just sort of holding his opponents and not really doing too much. But listen, the dude's just fighting how he needs to fight to be dominant, how he needs to fight for that second part of his paycheck to get his win bonus as well as the show. And for that, I respect it. And look, it's on his opponents. If you want to get up, if you need to get up, then get back up to your feet. And if you can't, then you're just getting beaten by the better fighter. And I understand, people want entertainment and They want to see more, excitement inside the cage. But you've got to remember that these, if your strength is holding your opponent down and going home with double your paycheck, then that's what you're going to do. The issue is with Almeida is the first time he came across a fighter that's going to be able to sort of counteract what he does was Curtis Blaydes. And he did have a good first round against Blaydes in regards to just being able to hold on him. He took him down a few times, but then Blaydes kept standing back up. He couldn't take Blaydes down and settle him. And that was the first time that we'd really seen that from Almeida, because every other fighter that Almeida had fought in the UFC, He'd been able to take down as he wanted to, just like he did against Blaydes, but he was able to get the back to the mat and keep them down. So with Blaydes, he couldn't do that, but it's okay. He still won that first round just by, holding him and keeping him where he needed to keep him. But then in the second round, I just don't really know what happened, to be honest. He shot on Blaydes. Blaydes was landing a few punches, as he defended against the cage. And then suddenly, the takedown attempt stopped and Blaydes was allowed to continue to punch. And, that was the fight. It was a really odd finish to a fight where Almeida looked like, although he wasn't as successful as what he wanted to be in the cage, he was still finding winning. He was still winning the round. He won the first round and just had to replicate that for another round and then stay safe. So that was interesting. Now with Spivac doesn't have the wrestling that Curtis Blaydes has, but Spivac is still a decent wrestler and he's still a decent grappler. And it's actually Spivac who has that MO of also wanting to take his opponent down and lay on top of him and be heavy on top. He's, again, just like Almeida, the very light heavyweights, and I don't mean the light heavyweights in the 205 division. I mean, they're both heavyweight fighters, but they're on the lighter end of it. So these guys are weighing in at like 235, 240, rather than, your 265 with your absolute monster heavyweights. So they're actually going to be quite even from a weight perspective, and from a stylistic perspective, they're going to be quite even as well. But because they're both going to be even from a weight perspective, I kind of feel like I trust Almeida a little bit more in this spot. Like, Almeida's a guy that has been lifting 265-pound guys off the feet and dumping them. The only flip side to this, and again, I know I'm flip-flopping here, but the only flip side to that is that, a 265-pound man is going to have a harder time getting off his back with Almeida on top of him than what a lighter guy is. So maybe Spivac's got a better chance of being able to stand back up to his feet. But the thing is with Almeida's the guy that will stick to you like glue. And I think that when you're looking at this fight from an overall perspective, yes, both fighters are, even within the wrestling and the grappling. I just think Almeida might be a little bit stronger and Almeida's just a little bit more relentless. Whereas I think with Spivac, he won't mind moments out on the feet striking with Almeida because he's going to be the better striker, in my opinion. But that's only going to make Almeida want to close the distance more, get a hold of Spivac and take him down. Whereas if Spivac's trying to take Almeida down, I think he's just going to have a hard time. I'm not saying he can't take him down, but I just think that when you're looking at which fighter's going to be on top more often than the other opponent, and which fighter's going to be in the, the grinding, dominant clinch positions against the cage, I think that's more likely to be Almeida, and I kind of feel that's where the fight's won and lost. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jailton Almeida to win this fight. And in the next fight, I think this is going to be a fast and explosive fight. We've got Zach Reese versus Sedriques Dumas. Now, Sedriques, Dumas and Reese are both really tall fighters. They're long-rangey fighters. And they've had plenty of fights in the past. Maybe Reese a little bit more with him being 6'4", but they've had plenty of fights where they sort of outrange and, the taller, physically bigger and longer than their opponents. But in this fight, they're both going to be very similar. Like I say, Zach Reese is 6'4", Sedriques Dumas is 6'2". The reach is quite similar as well. So there's not going to be a lot physically between both fighters. So we're going to see, in my opinion, a fight that's got quite a lot of action, because, if Zach Reese is 6'4" and he's fighting someone at 5'9" or 5'10", then the guy at 5'9" and 5'10" has got to constantly be coming forward trying to close the distance before they can even land. Whereas both of these guys in this fight are going to be able to land at the ranges that they need to land at because they're very similar in height and reach. So yeah, I think that we're going to see plenty of action in this fight. Both fighters like to be aggressive and come forward, so that could be a car crash style that we see. And yeah, I just feel that both fighters are quite well-rounded. They'll mix in takedowns into the game, a bit of topside grappling if it's there, but predominantly they're both strikers that like to land heavy shots. So yeah, I think it's a match made for violence. And when it comes to violence, I think Zach Reese is just more violent. Like, Zach Reese is an interesting one because I kind of think that he's a bit of an enigma at the minute. Like, I'm not sure exactly how high his ceiling is, but he's progressing in the right way. The UFC are matching him with, fights that allow him to, showcase his skill set. But at some point, and especially if he beats and knocks out Dumas in this fight, I think that Reese is going to have a significant step up in competition, so we can see exactly where he's at. But I think that he's got the potential to be a fighter that does, I'm not going to say break the top 15, but man, he's got the ability and the explosive, violent nature to be able to start winning fights maybe within the top 20, 30 in the division. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how far he goes. But for this fight, I think that Dumas is going to come forwards. I think Reese is going to come forwards. I think both fighters are going to want to try and bully and try and intimidate their opponent, and because of that we're going to see two fighters that are coming at each other and meeting in the middle. And when that happens, I think, like I say, I think Reese is slightly more explosive, I think he's slightly more powerful as well, and I think he's got more weapons in his arsenal within being elusive on the feet. And what I mean by elusive is he'll throw strikes that you probably don't see coming from slightly different angles, and he's got a variety of strikes that he'll use as well. So 1 minute you might be in boxing range and then a flying knee might come out of nowhere. He's a little bit harder to predict, he's a little bit more unorthodox, and he's definitely, for me, got more variety within his striking. So for those reasons, I'm picking Zach Reese to win this fight. In the next fight, we've got an insane stylistic matchup. Outside of the main event and the co-main event, this is by far my favourite fight on the entire card. Cannot wait to see this fight. Really looking forward to it. I'm super shocked it's been buried this low. But we've got Grant Dawson versus Diego Ferreira. And like I say, stylistically, it's outrageous because we've got Grant Dawson, who is predominantly a wrestler, versus Diego Ferreira, that's predominantly a grappler. Now, that's just from the outset. How this fight actually looks playing out, it's going to be so interesting because Diego Ferreira has been in this game for a long, long time. It doesn't look like he's slowing down. Sorry, my accent kind of came through where you didn't know whether I was saying does and doesn't. It doesn't look like Diego Ferreira is slowing down. He's looking, career best at the minute, even though, he is on the wrong side of 30. But look, age is just a number. He's still looking really good. He's on a 2-fight win streak with 2 finishes. But going back to, Ferreira wrestling other really good relentless pressure wrestlers, this guy's been in there with, go back to Rustam Khabilov back in the day. Yeah, it's 2019. It was 6 years ago. But like, Khabilov was predominantly a wrestler. All he wanted to do was wrestle. He did take Diego Ferreira down 3 times, but Ferreira won the fight. And even the losses that Ferreira's took, so like Beneil Dariush took him down 5 times, Gregor Gillespie took him down 4 times, Gamrot took him down 4 times. He lost all those 3 fights, but again, if you're just looking at the paper record, it doesn't look good in this specific fight with the numbers. But if you actually use your eyes and go back and watch those fights, like, Ferreira was causing so many issues. Like, the Beneil Dariush fight was a split decision that could have gone either way. Every time Dariush took him down, he couldn't hold him down. Ferreira was just a nightmare to deal with. And this is Beneil Dariush, who's got good topside pressure. He's got good grappling. I've already explained that, in his breakdown against Moicano. Like, Dariush has caused problems for so many fighters with the wrestling and grappling because he's so much better from a grappling perspective. But then when he fought Diego Ferreira, Ferreira's a legit black belt himself. I think he's a 3rd degree black belt, if I remember rightly. So Dariush had a nightmare issue with Ferreira because he just couldn't control him in the way that he wanted to. Gregor Gillespie, the same thing. That fight ended early in round 2, so those 4 takedowns were in round 1, and that means that Ferreira kept on standing back up. So Gillespie was one of the most relentless wrestlers you'll ever see in the UFC with how much pace and pressure that he put on with takedown after takedown after takedown. And like I say, Ferreira wasn't looking too bad until, unfortunately, he got hurt in that fight. Same thing with Gamrot. Gamrot, again, that fight ended early in round 2. And Gamrot had 4 takedowns, which most of them were in round 1. So again, Ferreira's standing back up constantly and making their opponents work. And the thing is with Gillespie, at one point you're thinking Gillespie's broke. In that first round, you're thinking Gillespie's broke here. He's shot too many takedowns. He can't get close to Ferreira. And Ferreira's, standing back up every time he's taken down. But then Gillespie found that second gear. He found the second gear and did what he needed to do. But then go back to Ferreira's last fight. Big underdog against Mateusz Rebecki. Rebecki took him down 4 times. Rebecki's, got a pressure wrestling game as well. But again, Ferreira was finding the get-ups and the reversals. Ferreira ended up taking him down 3 times in that fight, which was the first time we saw Ferreira actually attack with the wrestling against a wrestler. And then Ferreira landed 123 strikes to finish Mateusz Rebecki in round 3 as well. So, look, the point that I'm getting is Ferreira's fought this style of Grant Dawson so many times, but the thing is Grant Dawson's style's always been dominant. Like, I've been on Grant Dawson so many times in his career. When others, especially at the start of his career, in the UFC at least, were giving him shit from like a striking perspective and he was so one-dimensional, I trusted that one dimension because I knew that he was a dominant wrestler. He's also a good top-side grappler as well. And then he made the move to American Top Team, which I thought was absolutely perfect for him and, a perfect fit. And he's looked a lot better since then. So I've been on Grant Dawson. I've bet on him so many times. The first time that I didn't was against Bobby Green. Bobby Green was like plus 300 underdog. I think I got him at plus 300 anyway. It might have been plus 280. But he was around a plus 300 underdog. And I thought, you know what? Bobby Green's defensive wrestling is actually decent. He's got experience. He's, up there in age, but he's fought some of the best fighters in the division. His striking's good as well. I thought there's no way Bobby Green should be a plus 300 underdog. If Grant Dawson was like a minus 150 favourite, I'd have bet Grant Dawson in that Bobby Green fight. But from a betting perspective, I liked Bobby Green, and then what happened? It took Bobby Green just over 30 seconds and knocked him out. And look, that fight didn't play out the way I thought it was going to play out. I thought we were going to see Grant Dawson, go into the fight, shoot takedowns, Bobby Green defends, Grant Dawson starts getting tired, all that sort of stuff. I actually think that's what we see in this fight. So look, we might see another first round knockout again, but I think that Grant Dawson is going to have moments in this fight, especially early in round 1, where he's super dominant, where Ferreira is having trouble just getting him away and getting him to stop shooting takedowns. But I think the longer this fight goes on, I think Ferreira starts defending more and more takedowns. I think the get-up game of Ferreira is one of the best in the UFC, so I think he is going to be able to get up from Grant Dawson, make him work. It'll be takedown after takedown for Dawson, trying to hold him down, but then Ferreira stands back up. And the thing is with Dawson, I don't think that he's got the best gas tank when his opponents provide so much resistance. If you provide a lot of resistance to Dawson and you're good where he's strong, then you can tire him out. And I think that's what we're going to see here. I think we're going to see Dawson completely dominant in round 1. But then after round 1, it starts looking a little bit better for Ferreira. Dawson starts tiring a little bit. Ferreira starts landing some good shots. Because this is the thing we've not even spoke about as well. Like, I think Ferreira's the better striker here. So I genuinely think that, look, for Dawson to win this fight, if he can be as dominant in round 1 as he is in round 2, then he's going to win the fight. On decision at least, because Ferreira's not going to have enough time to come back into the fight, and I'm not convinced Ferreira finishes him either. But if Ferreira really starts with heavy resistance in that first round and making Dawson work, then Ferreira could potentially start closing the gap on that fight in round 2 and then take round 3. So I think it's one of these fights where we're going to see Grant Dawson round 1, Ferreira round 3, and then how fast can Ferreira tire Dawson? How fast can he start shutting that door on Dawson in round 2? So again, I think it's a super competitive fight. I think stylistically it's a match made in heaven. This is perfect matchmaking, which is the reason I'm so excited to see it. And then, like I say, it's going to be a super close fight, whoever wins, because I'm not convinced we get a finish. I don't think Dawson knocks Ferreira out. I'd be shocked if he did. And I certainly don't think he submits him, with Ferreira having, the BJJ credentials he's got. So then I'm thinking, well, is Ferreira going to knock Dawson out? Well, there's a possibility. Bobby Green did it in 30 seconds. Could Ferreira submit Grant Dawson? Well, yeah, he probably could. He's a legit enough black belt to submit him. And then with Ferreira having the potential gas tank advantages, I think it's a good fight for Ferreira. For those reasons, I'm picking Diego Ferreira to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Karol Rosa versus Ailin Perez. And this is an interesting fight stylistically as well. I'm laughing because I'm saying it about every fight. It's a really, really good card. The fights are matched well. And yeah, I think it's going to be an exciting event overall. Now, with Karol Rosa and Ailin Perez, they've got similar styles. They can both strike. I think Ailin Perez is a little bit more aggressive in regards to trying to land big shots, whereas Karol Rosa will sit down on a little bit more technique and look to accumulate volume than landing like big overhand rights, for example. But then both fighters like takedowns. Rosa, again, the takedowns are a little bit different, so Rosa will more look for trips and, reap the leg out, get their opponent down that way, whereas Perez will look for more traditional wrestling, the single legs, the double legs. So we've got a little bit of a difference there with the wrestling. And then the grappling. Again, they're both very different. Ailin Perez will, she's got submissions in her locker, absolutely, but she will look for, to secure a hard top position, land ground and pound, whereas Karol Rosa is a bit lighter on top, will float to position from position to position, will probably prefer to take the back and look for a choke. So although they're very similar in style, like they're both well-rounded, striking, wrestling, grappling, they're also very different in all those areas. And when you match them up, look, I think it's going to be one of these fights where, again, if there's not a finish, I think both fighters are going to potentially take a round, but those rounds might be quite close, and then there's going to be one round that could go 50-50. I think it's going to be a close fight, but when I'm looking at the individual skill sets, I think the striking of Rosa I trust a little bit more than Perez. I actually think Perez might be the better wrestler here, but in regards to the grappling, like we've seen Perez hit takedowns on Jocelyn Edwards, for example. I was high on Perez. I think I had like 4.5 units on Perez in that fight, and Edwards was sweeping Perez like I didn't expect. So I think if Edwards is hitting those type of sweeps and reversals against Perez, I think Karol Rosa absolutely can. And this is the reason why I'm edging towards Rosa, because from a striking perspective, like I say, I trust Rosa a little bit more with a technique approach opposed to the big bombs. And then when it comes to the wrestling, yeah, Perez might get more takedowns than Rosa, but I think Rosa's the better grappler. So I think on the feet, Rosa wins. I think on the ground, Rosa wins. For that reason, I'm picking Karol Rosa to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Reinier Nakamura versus Muin Gafurov. Now, Reinier Nakamura, I think, is a fighter that is going to win a lot of these types of fights until he starts being truly tested in the top 15. Like, Nakamura's wrestling is just high level, his grappling's good, he can also throw bombs on the feet. So basically what he does is he's aggressive on the feet, he'll throw his bombs to close the distance. Once he closes the distance, he shoots in for a takedown, he'll get you down, he's got good top control as well, and he's just a nightmare to deal with. Now, Muin Gafurov is a fighter that I actually like, super entertaining. Again, very similar to Nakamura in regards to style, throws bombs, looks to get in close, will take you down. But the thing is, Nakamura is so much more clean and dominant with his style than what Gafurov is. Gafurov, again, that's not a knock on Gafurov. Gafurov's, like I say, is a good fighter. I love to watch him fight. But I think that he can just get it. He can be got at, especially when he's fighting a fighter that's better in each area, because that's what I think Nakamura is. I think Nakamura is a slightly better striker. And then when it comes to the wrestling and grappling, I definitely think Nakamura is more dominant. What I think we're going to see in this fight is Gafurov just struggle to get in the fight. I think there might be some moments early for Gafurov where he's winging big bombs. Every time Nakamura tries to set something up, I think Gafurov's going to try and get his respect early with a big shot. Maybe he catches Nakamura and knocks him out early. Like I say, Gafurov, packs some bungalows. He'll hit the overhand right hands at his opponent, hit him hard, hurt them. But once Nakamura starts getting into the flow of the wrestling, once Gafurov's been taken down 2 or 3 times and felt the strength and the top side heaviness of Nakamura, I think when the fight does get back up to the feet, Gafurov's going to be very hesitant to load up on an overhand right, just because Nakamura will be looking to level change, duck under those and take him down. And from there, I think we just see Nakamura take over the fight. Like I say, I feel like Nakamura is going to be dominant in these types of fights until he's truly tested against, a real solid UFC caliber fighter in the top 15. I think that's when we're going to see Nakamura, it's either going to make or break him. But right now, outside of that top 15, I think he's going to be fine. So for those reasons, I'm picking Reinier Nakamura to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ricky Turcios versus Bernardo Sopai. Now, this fight was supposed to have happened in November. I believe, they both weighed in as well. It was a medical issue for Ricky Turcios for the reason why they couldn't fight. And look, you can't read too much into that. It could have been absolutely anything. It could have been a stomach bug where he couldn't get off the toilet, or, he was throwing up, or it could have been a number of different things that was an issue with Turcios. He may have just been ill and just couldn't physically make the fight. So the UFC have rescheduled it. Obviously, it's happening now a couple of months after. That gives both fighters a chance to, recover from the weight cut and then go again. But it's a potentially a really good fight, and I can see why the UFC have booked it twice. I'm sure I broke it down once already, but I'll do it again. Now, with Ricky Turcios, from The Ultimate Fighter, I was really psyched to see Turcios in the UFC because he's a character. He'll talk to his opponents. He's got a personality, which I really like when fighters have a unique personality as well. But then inside the cage, he was like a ball of energy, plenty of striking, takedowns. He's got a good grappling game. But then he's had a couple of fights since The Ultimate Fighter where he's been quite flat. It seems like he's going strike for strike with his opponents. The activity levels are low. The takedowns aren't there for him, or at least he's not trying too hard to get the fights down to the mat. And it's causing relatively actionless fights. And it's just a little bit underwhelming, if I'm being honest, because like I say, I was really hyped on Turcios from an entertainment perspective. He was super fun to watch, but he's had a couple of fights where he's just maybe not. He's just had maybe an off night, or he's not been able to get his game going, or maybe he's just fighting a high level of competition now where, he can't really flourish in the way he likes to flourish inside the cage. Maybe he's got a lot of pressure on himself to win fights now. Is in the big leagues, and you can't afford a loss in the UFC too many times. I don't know what it is, but something's changed with Turcios. But that version of Turcios is so beatable. For Bernardo Sopai is a really good fighter, well-rounded, coming off that bad KO in his UFC debut. But even though he was losing that fight, he had moments where he was really good as well. You can see that there's a good, solid, well-rounded fighter in Sopai. And I actually think that he's got a higher ceiling than maybe some people are thinking right now after he had that loss in his UFC debut. I think Sopai has got, a good ability of striking, wrestling, grappling. He can blend all three together really well, but he's also good in all areas as well. It's a little bit like Belal Muhammad, for example. Good striker, good wrestler, good grappler. Doesn't really shine in one specific area in regards to being elite in one area over the rest of his game, but it's just so good everywhere. And I feel like Bernardo Sopai has that similar sort of style where in 3 years' time, I think we can be looking at Sopai thinking, well, he's not a young kid anymore. He's got experience behind him. He's got plenty of wins in the UFC, and he's developed rapidly to the point where he might be in the top 15. And this is where I think that Turcios is going to have a problem, because where does Turcios actually beat Sopai? I think even Turcios at his best, his entertainment, he's fast, he's having fun in the cage. I think Sopai is more technical from a striking perspective. So whereas Turcios is quite wild, I think Sopai can be hitting him with some good clean technique. And then when it comes to the wrestling, I think Sopai again is a good wrestler. I think we could see Sopai take Turcios down. Then I think Sopai on top, if Turcios starts playing guard, potentially looking for arm bars and triangles, Sopai can look good from a top side position as well. But if Turcios takes Sopai down, I think Sopai can get back up to his feet. So I kind of feel like Sopai is just slightly better in every single area. And for those reasons, I'm picking Bernardo Sopai to win this fight. And in the next fight, the final fight to break down, we have Tagir Ulanbekov versus Clayton Carpenter. And I think it's a really good opening fight to the card, if I'm being honest. I am quite surprised, though, that the UFC are giving Ulanbekov to Carpenter, or maybe the other way around, depending on which way you look at it. But what I'm basically trying to say is I think Clayton Carpenter is a really good fighter that I think being developed in the right way could have a relatively high ceiling in the UFC. Like, his striking's good, his wrestling's good, his grappling is really good. He's got good cardio, he's got a good pace, he's got finishes as well. So I'm kind of surprised that the UFC have not stopped building him, but they just want to know right now. And they're throwing him to Tagir Ulanbekov, who, look, Ulanbekov's been quite hit and miss in the UFC. Like, he's had fights where you absolutely think he's going to steamroll, and he doesn't necessarily come up short, but the fight's super close, super, like I say, way closer than what we're expecting, split decision type of greasy decision. So with Ulanbekov, it's not been complete dominance. However, when he's had fights where you think, actually, he's gone to a split decision a couple of times before, and they've been razor close fights, and now he's fighting, fighter A, and like Cody Durden was a good example. Like, Ulanbekov had gone to that many close fights, had that many close fights and close decisions that you think that Cody Durden's got a really good chance of beating Ulanbekov, but then Ulanbekov just looks like a level above when he fights him. So the thing is with Ulanbekov, he'll step up when he needs to. When he's fighting a fighter that has got a chance of beating him, he'll step up and look dominant in those fights. But then he'll have fights where you're expecting dominance and then it's much closer than you think. This is one of these types of fights where I think that Clayton Carpenter, from a pre-fight perspective, has got a real good chance of causing Ulanbekov problems. But historically, this is the type of fight that, because of that, Ulanbekov comes out and absolutely smokes his opponent. So I'm not going to sit here and predict that Ulanbekov's going to smoke Carpenter, but I just think that Ulanbekov poses problems here that I think Carpenter won't have dealt with before, and I think Carpenter could easily drop a couple of rounds in this fight. Ulanbekov's striking is a little bit underrated, but when Carpenter gets his game going, he gets his game going with the wrestling and with the grappling, or at least just closing the distance. And if he closes the distance against Ulanbekov, I think Ulanbekov will take a clinch all day long. And then Ulanbekov, I'd then give the advantage to in those clinch positions to get a takedown and get Carpenter down on the mat. And maybe he doesn't keep Carpenter down for very long initially, but I think the longer the fight goes on, the more success Ulanbekov's going to have grappling. And it could even be something as simple as Ulanbekov takes Carpenter down, Carpenter scrambles instantly, doesn't allow any sort of settling off his back with shoulders on the mat, scrambles instantly, goes to a knee to try and get back up, and then Ulanbekov takes his back, gets a body triangle, and then suddenly, it's super dangerous for Carpenter, chokes him out. It could be simple. It could be something as simple as that. I think from an overall fight perspective, it should be very competitive, but I've got a funny feeling Ulanbekov's going to make this fight look much easier than what a lot of people are expecting, including myself, because, like I say, I'm not going to sit here and say that Ulanbekov's going to whitewash Carpenter, but like I've already mentioned, historically, these are the fights where Ulanbekov does look very, very good, in the fights that you think are going to be very, very close. It's the fights that you think Ulanbekov's going to dominate that he somehow ends up fighting to his opponent's level, and it gets super close. So, yeah, look, in regards to a pick and a prediction, I really hope I'm right when I say that this fight should be competitive, but I've just got a funny feeling Ulanbekov's going to show up on the night. For those reasons, I'm picking Tagir Ulanbekov to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. For those that do prefer a shorter podcast, I apologise. We've gone over the hour mark, but we've got an absolutely insane card on Saturday night. We've got 14 fights as well, which increases the podcast time. Then we had the two absolutely hyper championship fights in the main and the co-main, and then I wanted to summarise those picks as well, so that had a little bit of extra time. So all in all, I don't think I've done too badly keeping it under under an hour and 15 minutes. So yeah, that's it for the podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in. If you do have any opinions, which I'm sure so many people are going to have opinions on this fight card, come over to YouTube if you're listening on to one of our podcast platforms like Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Music. Come over to YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube as well. It's free to do. It helps us a lot. And then from YouTube, you can leave your comments and tell me where we disagree, or tell me your picks, or tell me where we do agree, or anything that you want to talk about. I am always busy throughout fight week with other roles that I have in MMA, but I do try my best to come onto YouTube and reply to every single comment every single week. Of course, if you're an ass, I'm not going to reply to you because I just can't be asked. Arrogance, not for me. If you're really sound and you just want to have a conversation, then that's cool. I'll have that conversation with you. And again, one last time, if you are wanting to jump into the action this weekend from a betting perspective, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. Our packages are really simple. We don't separate any sort of content for different types of packages. Just choose whether you want to pay for one event, a monthly subscription, or whether you want to take advantage of our $99 annual subscription, which card by card, it works out super cheap to do that. But also the reason why we're affordable is because our ethos here is we want you to win the money back that you've paid for your subscription so you can start profiting on your bets as quickly as possible. It's no good paying $500, $600, $700 for an annual subscription and then you've got to win all that money back first before you can then start profiting on your bets. So that's the reason why we're affordable, to allow people to start making money as quickly as possible, and that's all at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I'll see you again next week.